Okay, this session is recorded. Again, thank you all for joining. I'm going to turn the presentation over to the project manager for WILMAPCO, the Wilmington Area Planning Council, Heather Dunnigan. Heather, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Welcome, everybody. We wish we were all here in person as we were back in January at the Brandywine Fire Hall, but we still hope we can get your feedback on some draft recommendations to help shape the study for the Governor Printz Boulevard. So next slide. I, again, am Heather Dunnigan with the Wilmington Area Planning Council. WILMAPCO is the regional planning agency for Cecil County, Maryland, and Newcastle County, Delaware. And so our role is really to bring together the different agencies responsible for transportation planning and make sure the public has a voice in the decision-making process. Next slide. So first, some logistics. Hopefully you can hear me. If you can't hear me, hopefully you can read the slide, and you'll see there's an access number, phone number, and access code that if you're having trouble with your audio or the audio is not coming in very well, you might try connecting via phone. Hopefully you can see the presentation. If you're having trouble seeing the presentation, you can go to the WILMAPCO website at wilmapco.org/Governor Printz, and a copy of the presentation is there for download. So you will note that you're muted. We have more than 100 people participating tonight, and so obviously that would be pretty chaotic if folks weren't unmuted, but we do have ways for you to communicate with us. So at the bottom right of your screen, the right side of your screen, you'll see a panel, and at the bottom of that, there's a question box. You can ask questions at any point during the presentation, and we will get to them at the Q&A portion of the event after the presentation. If you're having trouble with the questions box, you can email my colleague, Randy Novakoff, at rnovakoff@wilmapco.org, and she'll make sure the questions get passed on to us. Next slide. So you can also view the materials after the workshop at that wilmapco.org Governor Printz website, and we'll have a survey there as well. And please feel free to share this with anyone else who might be interested in seeing the information and commenting. Next slide. So our agenda for tonight, we'll be spending about 40 minutes presenting about the project. And after that, we will be answering your questions. If you've got other questions that come up after tonight, again, at that website is all of my contact information, and I'll be happy to respond to you at any time. But with that, let's get rolling. But before we do, we've got a quick poll question to get some more information about you. We want to know a little bit more about how many people are attending with you tonight, or whether you're attending alone. And if Jeff or Leah can launch that poll.
Looks like about 90% of people have voted, Heather, so I'll go ahead and close the poll.
Great, thank you, Jeff. So most people are attending by themselves, which is not surprising, but we do have a few people who are attending with groups of 2 or 3, so that's great. And again, if you know others who might be interested, you can always share the information with them so people have a chance to provide feedback. So next slide. So our study area is a little more than 6 miles, extending all the way from North Claymont, near the new Claymont train station, to the city of Wilmington along Governor Printz Boulevard. And we'll be looking today at kind of the main corridor, but once we've moved ahead with some recommendations, we'll look at how it can tie into some of those surrounding areas. Next, we're going to ask another quick poll question to get a better sense how you use the Governor Printz corridor. And actually, if none of these apply for you, you can go ahead and not click anything, but hit submit.
We have most people. I think we'll wait just a few more seconds.
Great. So definitely the bulk of everybody travels along the corridor, but about 23% of us in the group live along the corridor and 11% work along the corridor. Next slide. So WMAPCO is the managing agency for the study, but we're certainly not doing this alone. We're working in partnership with DelDOT and Delaware Transit Corporation, which are the transportation providers along the corridor. Newcastle County Department of Land Use is part of our team as the land use agency for the area. And Delaware Greenways is part of this, really with an interest in connecting the East Coast Greenway through the corridor, as well as possibly connecting Fox Point State Park and Bellevue State Parks by walking and biking. Next slide. We're also coordinating with other organizations that are working along the corridor, such as regional civic associations, Chamber of Commerce, East Coast Greenway, and municipalities along the corridor. But most importantly, we're really coordinating and reaching out to people who live, work, and own property in this area. We're doing this through an advisory committee that's made up of all these different groups, as well as through these public workshops. Next slide. So the purpose of the study, I'm not going to read all this, but basically we're trying to look holistically at the study area to see what the corridor's current and future needs are, and then develop recommendations that will address these future needs and current needs. So we're using your feedback as well as technical analysis to look at what the options are for meeting those needs and what are feasible and best meet the community's interests. Next slide. So we've been at this for a while now. We began our process last summer, really looking at current conditions and existing issues along the area. Then we had a community visioning process that included a November bus tour with the advisory committee. In January, we held a public workshop, and many of you were there. It's wonderful. And then February, we had an online survey to follow up from the public workshop. So since then, we've been working to identify some initial options for analysis. We took a little bit further look at that and refined the options, and we'll be presenting those options to you tonight for your feedback. After that, we'll use your feedback to select the preferred concept and develop a final report that will be available later this fall. And with that, I will turn it over to Leah Casanda, who is part of our consultant team, to talk a little bit more about what we heard through the outreach process.
Thank you, Heather. My name is Leah Casanda, and I'm a planner with Whitman Ruckhart and Associates. And as Heather shared, we did have a public workshop where we got to meet in person back in January. We had 81 attendees and shared information about existing conditions along the corridor, including details about land use, the flood zone, and population and employment projections. We looked at maps showing existing infrastructure for pedestrians, people who ride bikes, and people who take transit, as well as vehicular volumes. We also discussed development planned in the vicinity of Governor Printz Boulevard. We then broke into small groups to identify and prioritize goals for each user groups: people who walk, bike, take transit, and drive. Major priorities identified included making a connection to Fox Point State Park for people who walk and bike, and providing protected facilities for people who walk and bike along Governor Printz Boulevard. The majority of attendees at the public workshop were in favor of road reconfiguration, or reducing the number of vehicular lanes to slow speeds and make more room for people walking or biking along the corridor. After the workshop, the presentation and feedback received was made available on the project website for review, along with an online survey. During the month of February, 75 people took the survey. Participants were asked to prioritize improvements identified at the public workshop. The survey affirmed that the majority of participants are interested in improved access to Fox Point State Park, along with improved facilities for walkers and bikers along the corridor. But the big difference from the public workshop was that online survey participants prioritized maintaining the capacity of the existing roadway. The information from the first meeting and the February survey, including the presentation, boards, and feedback, are available on the project website. Based on the feedback received at the public workshop, from the online survey, and from members of the Advisory Committee and Management Committee, the following objectives were developed for each user group. Objectives for people who walk include providing continuous sidewalks or pathways along the entire corridor, as well as access to Fox Point Park and nearby destinations. Objectives were similar for people who bike, providing low-stress bike facilities or facilities that are physically separated from traffic along the entire corridor, as well as improving access to nearby destinations. For people who take transit, the objectives are providing additional bus stops and shelters along the corridor, as well as improving access to the Claymont train station. For people who drive, we're looking at speeding traffic and determining the best way to allocate roadway space. And lastly, objectives for all users include improving lighting, greening the corridor, and improving stormwater management. Now, Mike will share the alternatives that were developed to meet all of these objectives.
Thank you, Leah. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Campbell. I'm a landscape architect with WRA, and I'd like to briefly walk you through the existing conditions and the alternatives that have been developed based on the feedback we heard during our first public workshop. As Heather described, our project area extends from the city of Wilmington limits at the southern end of the corridor to the new Claymont Transportation Center to the north via Governor Printz Boulevard and Philadelphia Pike. The total corridor is a little over 6 miles long and is flanked by a mixture of residential, commercial, and retail land use to the west and I-495, Amtrak, and the Delaware River to the east. There are existing sidewalks scattered along the corridor. However, there's not a continuous pedestrian connection. The shoulders vary in width and are marked as on-road bike facilities in both directions for the entire length. Governor Printz Boulevard is a divided roadway by a grass median which varies in width and provides left turn lanes and vehicle crossings for northbound traffic. There are extensive overhead and underground utilities throughout the corridor, which have been considered in the development of the alternatives. There are many destinations along the corridor, including the retail shopping at Merchant Square. This shopping center currently has one of the few grocery stores accessible to residents in Northeast Wilmington and the Bellefonte neighborhoods. There are many planned projects adjacent to and directly within the corridor that were taken into consideration during the development of the alternatives. Several of these projects will create new destinations and increase demand for alternative transportation options. While we know what the specific impacts to the corridor will be for some of these improvements, others, such as the port development, are still being planned, and there may be opportunities to incorporate recommendations from this study. As Leah described, one of the key considerations we heard from the public is the importance of making a direct connection to Fox Point Park. Fox Point Park is a 100-acre state park situated along the west bank of the Delaware River. The park offers scenic views, wildlife views, picnic areas, playgrounds, and if you haven't been there when a large container ship is coming up the Delaware River, it's quite impressive. The park is an unutilized asset due to the remote location and is virtually only accessible by car. As part of this study, we looked at two potential feasible connections, one at Stoney Creek and the other at Edgemore Road, which both have significant challenges. Stoney Creek is a small tidal tributary to the Delaware River located just north of Caulfield Parkway. The creek is spanned by several major transportation entities, including I-495, Amtrak, High-Speed Rail, and Norfolk Southern Freight Rail. While some of the overhead structures meet trail standards, which require a 10-foot minimum overhead clearance, many of them would require significant excavation. In addition to the extreme difficulty of just coordinating with these major transportation facilities, the largest challenge we see is the narrow opening you see here at the mouth of the creek. Being tidal, the trail would flood twice daily, requiring significant signage or possibly digital flood monitoring stations to alert users of the potential hazard. The second connection at Edgemore Road also has significant challenges. While the connections from Lighthouse Road to Governor Printz Boulevard require relatively minor improvements, the primary challenge is the limited right-of-way along Lighthouse Road, which creates an unsafe area with heavy truck turning movement and storage. The at-grade skewed railroad crossing also limits the ability to provide a safe pedestrian access to the park. The alternative shown here would provide direct access from the proposed pedestrian and bicycle improvements on Governor Printz Boulevard along a widened sidewalk on Edgemore Road to a new off-road connection shown in purple on the west side of Lighthouse Road. To avoid I-495 ramp conflicts, railroad right-of-way conflicts, and truck movements, this section is either proposed to be an elevated structure extending on the east side of Lighthouse Road or potentially looping around the west side of the asphalt plant as shown in orange. A new perpendicular at-grade crossing of the railroad to the north would allow safe access to the park. As you can see, there's a reason why this pedestrian connection has not been done before. It's very challenging. Okay, so now's the time that everyone should really pay attention, as there's going to be a short poll. We'll be asking the audience for their feedback following the presentation of the Governor Printz Boulevard alternatives. As a quick recap, the existing condition of Governor Printz Boulevard is a 4-lane divided highway with a right-of-way varying between 100 to 120 feet wide. There are paved shoulders on both sides of the highway, and the grass median varies in width. There are 3 alternatives developed with variations that show improvements on both the northbound and the southbound direction. All proposed alternatives meet the objectives that Leah described earlier in the presentation. Alternative 1A maintains 2 lanes of traffic in both directions, shoulders marked as bike lanes, and a new shared use pathway on the northbound side of the roadway. This alternative minimizes conflicts with vehicles. However, the trail will only be accessible by designated crossings of Governor Printz Boulevard. In addition to the trail, a sidewalk connection on the southbound side would provide additional pedestrian connections. This alternative requires a conversion of a portion of the median to new roadway. For this alternative, the addition of enhanced pedestrian crossings will be evaluated for key unsignalized intersections such as the Caulfield Parkway. Alternative 1B also maintains 2 lanes of traffic in both directions, with shoulders marked as bike lanes. However, the shared use path is located adjacent to the southbound travel lanes. This alternative also requires a median reduction and new roadway construction. Because the pathway is on the southbound side, it is more accessible to the adjacent land uses. However, it also creates more conflicts between path users and vehicles at roadways and driveways. Here's an example of what a typical shared use path crossing could look like for this alternative at a road or driveway crossing. Offsetting the crossing would allow for vehicles to stop prior to the pathway for increased safety. Some of the pros and cons of alternative 1A and 1B are that alternative 1A provides a direct access to Claymont Transportation Center as well as Edgemore. However, users have to cross Governor Printz Boulevard to access the pathway. Alternative 1B provides direct access for more users. However, there are 57 driveways and 26 unsignalized intersections that increase user conflict between vehicles and pedestrians. Alternative 2A is a lane reduction alternative that relocates both travel lanes to the southbound or east side of the roadway. Similar to alternative 1A, the shared use pathway would be on the northbound side with ample room for larger buffer and opportunities for additional trail amenities or even separated pedestrian and bike facilities. Alternative 2B is also a lane reduction, but the shared use path and potential pedestrian promenade would be adjacent to the southbound side of the roadway. This would allow direct access and eliminate having to cross the boulevard. However, there would be significant improvements needed to address the high number of user conflicts with adjacent roads and driveways. So to recap alternatives 2A and 2B, they have the same pros and cons as alternatives 1A and 1B with similar accessibility and user conflicts. However, 2A and 2B are relatively lower cost to implement due to not requiring new roadway construction. The final alternative is also a lane reduction in both directions. This option provides a shared use path on both sides of the roadway and maintains existing median and left turn lanes. Similar to other alternatives, the shoulders would be maintained as on-road bike facilities. This alternative maintains the wide boulevard feel for drivers and pedestrians alike. Alternative 3 creates enough space for pathways on both sides of the roadway. This allows for walkers and people who ride bikes to use west pathway for short local trips and the east pathway for through trips or recreational rides. Crossings would still be required at major intersections. To help guide the selection of a preferred alternative, we prepared a magnitude of cost and implementation analysis. As you can see here, alternative 1A and 1B has a medium-high difficulty of implementation and the highest cost of all alternatives. Alternatives 2A and 2B also have a medium-high rate of implementation difficulty, with 2A having a low implementation cost and 2B having a relatively high cost to implement. Alternative 3 is the easiest to implement and has a relatively low cost. It should be noted that alternatives 2A and 3 have the potential for a low-cost interim implementation, which would allow the project to be implemented on a much faster track. Another factor that had to be considered as part of the alternative development is the impacts to traffic. Using existing traffic data and new traffic intersection counts, we were able to determine the travel times for morning and evening commute during the peak hours. As you can see, the existing travel times for morning and evening commute, the existing travel times through the corridor shown in orange are approximately 4.5 minutes in the AM in both directions. Alternative 1 maintains that all existing travel lanes would have no impacts to traffic or travel times. Alternatives 2 and 3 both have slight increases in travel times due to lane reductions in both directions. Here you can see the existing travel times through the corridor are also approximately 4.5 minutes in the PM for both directions. For each of the alternatives, there are also relatively very minor delays, with the largest increase as 25 seconds for all of the scenarios that we just went through. So to summarize the comparison of the alternatives, this diagram shows how each alternative relates to the existing conditions. The gray shading represents the approximate existing roadway pavement widths, including shoulders. The green areas represent the existing median in the middle and non-roadway areas within the right-of-way on the outside edges. The red line in each of the proposed sections represents new full-depth roadway construction required within the median, and the white shading represents a new pedestrian sidewalk or pathway.
Thanks, Mike. So I will encourage all of you attendees to take a close look at this. I'm actually going to, on the next slide, zoom in a little bit to the proposed alternatives. So you can see, as Mike described in some detail, alternatives 1A and 1B, both of which retain 2 lanes in each direction plus a shoulder that acts as a bike lane, as well as a shared use pathway. Alternatives 2A and 2B, which provide 2-way traffic along one side of existing Governor Printz Boulevard, and a shared use pathway on the other side. And alternative 3, which provides one direction of travel, one lane of travel plus a shoulder or bike lane in each direction and shared use pathways on both sides. So we're going to ask 2 poll questions now. And there are multiple answers, so this is not a vote. You can choose all of them that you like. And that is for alternatives 1, 2, and 3. Which ones do you like, or are there none that you prefer? So I'm going to launch that poll right now. So go ahead and select as many as apply. Again, it's not a total vote. We take into account all of your opinions as well as the technical analysis that we've conducted and input from our advisory committee to make a decision. Looks like a little more than 2/3 of folks have voted, so we're going to wait a few more minutes. There's a little more involved in this poll. Okay, we're at 85%. I'm going to wait 15 more seconds to give everyone a chance to provide their input. Okay, let's see what our results are. And of course, our percentage adds up to more than 100 because people could select more than one option. The strongest preference was for alternative 3, which is 1 lane of traffic in each direction with the median. Very close to that is alternative 2, which is providing 1 lane of traffic in each direction on either one side or the other. And then in third place, the option retaining 4 lanes of traffic. Now we have another question, and I'm going to go back to the sections so you can see those now. And that is, which side of the road does the pathway make the most sense for? So the west side, which you see in alternatives 1B and 2B, is along the properties on the side of Governor Printz opposite I-495. So that is closer to properties, but has lots of individual roadway and driveway crossings. For alternatives 1A and 2A, the path is on the east side, so it's between Governor Printz and 495, which means it's uninterrupted by side roads and driveways, but it means you need to cross Governor Printz Boulevard to get to it. So there are pros and cons with each. Or an option in alternative 3 would be to provide that on both sides. So I'll go ahead and launch that poll now. So this is not a multiple option one. Do you like the west side, the east side, or both sides, which is only possible with alternative 3? Just a couple more seconds. All right, we've gotten about 90% of people who have weighed in. So here are the results. You'll see about half selected both sides, which is only possible with alternative 3. And then for the other two, there's a slight preference to the west side, 27%, as opposed to the east side, 21%. And again, your input is very valuable and it will be taken into account alongside the technical analysis and input from our advisory committee as we make some decisions. So thank you. So as we start our question and answer period, and I'll ask our panelists, please turn their cameras on. We want to hear from you. I mentioned that there is a survey available at WilMAPCO's website, wilmapco.org/Governor Printz. Please give us your feedback. We hope you can stick around for the Q&A session as well. We put this slide in here just in case folks were not able to. We want to hear from everyone, regardless of whether you just participated in these surveys or not. So please share this link with friends, family, and others who have an interest in Governor Printz Boulevard so we can get as much input as possible. So we'll start the question and answer period. So as we've mentioned before, there is a questions box to your right. If that little triangle next to the left of the word questions is pointing to the right, click on it and it will point down and you'll see a spot where you can enter a question for staff and enter your question there. We will go ahead and go through those roughly in the order that they're received. And I will start from the beginning. We have a number of them. So, and some are comments. I'll go ahead and mention a couple. One person said that attending the January workshop thought it was sufficient to stress the road diet concept, and they didn't have an opportunity to weigh in on the survey. That's fine. This is a good opportunity to weigh in again today, and we will take all input that we've received. So thank you for that. Next question is it expected that alternative 3 would result in traffic calming or slowing of traffic because of the reduced driving lanes? Leah, I saw you typed in a response and I'm not sure if everyone got that. So would you mind repeating that for the group?
Sure thing, Jeff. So because alternative 3 does reduce the number of vehicular lanes, that will definitely cut down on, the kind of behavior you see where people are aggressively passing one another on Governor Printz, and we do anticipate it would result in some traffic calming. It's impossible to say what that would be right now, but we do anticipate that.
Yeah, if I can just add, there would be an opportunity to have a reduction in speed if that was desired by DelDOT or by the community for additional traffic calming through that, dropping down to 1 lane.
I will quickly add, just to not get expectations too high for the traffic calming potential, that you could see from the travel time difference between the different scenarios that it's really not that big of a travel time difference. The road is still wide and straight and all those things that encourage speeding, as those of you who live there and near know. When you have a big wide open road, you do have speeding traffic. There is potential at some point to further evaluate the bike lanes and see whether those could be protected, which might further narrow the road and help slow the traffic down. But just in general, big wide roads tend to encourage speeding traffic, so I don't want to get everybody's hopes up.
Thank you all. The next question is long, and I'm really glad that people are taking the time to really focus on specifics, so thank you. With the walkable pathways, there are some amazing incentives to provide a river walk. There are a number of concerns about safe crossings, and currently Governor Printz has few crosswalks. With a proposal like 1B, 2B, or 3, would there be painted crosswalks, signalized crosswalks, or other mechanisms in place to cross Governor Printz Boulevard? How many of them may be placed and predominantly in what areas? Anyone want to take that one?
Sure, Jeff. I think as part of the next, as the project gets advanced into final design, the specific locations would be identified and a further traffic analysis would be identified to select the best crossing and the safest crossing for pedestrians. But there are lots of options that we can choose from advanced warning, such as an RRFB, Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, a rapid flashing beacon that would provide an advance warning for crossings. There's signage that can be used as well, but we would definitely want to make sure that these crossings are selected at locations that there's high visibility and it's the safest possible locations. But it's very important that they are highly improved crossings to make it as safe as possible.
Thank you, Mike. Next question is, or I guess it's more of a comment. I would really have liked to see an option where the bike lane was incorporated with a multi-use path with pedestrians. It's very unsafe as presently configured. I think, and it may not have shown up in the graphics, but bicyclists would have the option to use the shoulders, but the pathway either on either or both sides would be shared use. So it could be accommodate both pedestrians and bicyclists to maximize safety. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and if I could just add, I did not mention that the bike lanes in the shoulder serve two purposes. You know, during our analysis and talking with DelDOT, it was required that there be a shoulder next to the travel lane when we're doing a lane reduction, and that's partially so that if there's a breakdown or a car that needs assistance, there is a place for them to pull off and traffic can still flow freely. But similar to how it is now, that provides that opportunity for those A-level bike users that like traveling with traffic, that they could travel in the roadway as they can now. But you're right, Jeff, the shared use path would be for bicyclists as well as pedestrians.
Thank you. Just so the group knows, we have a lot of questions and I'm glad folks are bringing them on. So we'll try to get through them, as many of them as we can.
Jeff, if I may interject, for any
Sure.
questions we do not get to, we will have a log of all the questions asked and we can make sure to address them. We have your email address, we know who you are, so don't worry, we'll be in touch.
That's great, thank you. So the next question is, with all the money that Gulf Teaner will be putting into the new port at Edgemoor, will there be an effort to help them fund a safer access to Fox Point Park? Heather, do you have any thoughts from a policy perspective? I know WMAPCO's not in charge of it, but.
Yeah, I mean, that might be one to toss to the county after this is over, and that can be something we also, in the log of questions, have a follow-up from the county. But generally speaking, there is a coordination process that goes on when there's development between both the county and DelDOT. So the county obviously has approval of the development plans, and they do look to include bicycle and pedestrian connections as well as relevant traffic improvements as part of that planning process. DelDOT also thoroughly reviews the development plans and submits comments to the developer and the county, which generally get worked into the design process for the new development. So yes, we're absolutely hoping to see some improvements in that corridor for biking and walking as part of the Gulf Container project. Not only for people accessing the park, but also employees who are accessing Gulf Container certainly need good access to their job site.
Great, thank you. Next question is, if there's a 2-lane only option that's selected, would the speed limit be reduced?
Yeah, Jeff,
Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, sorry. As I think I'd said before, that that was something that we had talked to with DelDOT about possibilities of having a reduced speed through the corridor with the lane reduction.
Thank you. There was a reference to making Philadelphia Pike a main street. What does that mean?
I think there's some parcels under there that are probably underdeveloped. And so when you make transportation improvements, you do encourage more intensive development along the corridor. So there's a possibility to see more use of some of those underused parcels that are along the corridor for commercial uses, so that people have places they can walk to or have close places to drive to along the corridor. So improving transportation, usually you have improved land use that follows.
Thanks, Heather. Can you talk a little bit more about the pedestrian promenade? I guess regardless of which option it's included. Will it include active adult equipment, any other features? And how, if it's on the east side, how close would it get to I-495?
Those are all great ideas. And I think the part of the reason we tossed that pedestrian promenade into the mix of options is because really having such a wide open space area really allows you to plan pretty extensive park amenities within that. And so those are questions that would be determined during the design process of the project if that option gets picked. And there would probably need to be some partnership of different agencies, because park improvements are not something that DelDOT builds, but could be something that state parks or the county park system worked with DelDOT to have some amenities built into that.
Thank you, and I'll add to that. And Mike, I think this question is probably for you. How could climate change be improved by this project? Is there an opportunity for more greening, stormwater management, what have you?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where one of the promenade options comes into play, because that does provide an opportunity for green space. Linear park or linear stormwater management features could be added that could treat roadway runoff as well as trail and sidewalk runoff in that area. The other alternatives are very tight. So we're maximizing the amount of space. If we're going to maintain 4 travel lanes through there, there's not a whole lot of leftover space to do stormwater management.
Thanks, Mike. We've received a few comments as well, and we'll make sure to keep a record of those. I'm going to address questions first, though, to get to as many people as we can. There are a couple questions about turn lanes, especially if there's one lane of traffic in each direction. Would there be turn lanes, and how would they be configured?
Those alternatives that have the travel lanes adjacent to each other, the roadway width does vary, and there would be an opportunity to provide turn lanes for key intersections. There wouldn't be as many turn lanes as there are roadways to the left on the west side, but there would be an opportunity to have the roadway split and provide a queuing and a left turn lane in certain critical locations.
Thank you. Let's go to the question about the Fox Point Park connection, which is clearly important to a lot of people. Would it be possible, and you presented on this, Mike, so I don't know if this answer is for you, would it be possible to put a pedestrian bridge at the north end of Fox Point Park at Caulfield Parkway, as opposed to going under the existing bridges at Stoney Creek?
So that will be a third alternative that we may address in our feasibility study. We know that it is very, very challenging. There are overhead, high tension, high electrical wires. There's the Amtrak corridor with their overhead backfeed for their electrical service. It's a very significant challenge. It'd be very expensive, but it is something that we did look at and we'll address in the final recommendations. But it's just as challenging as the other two, if not more.
Thanks, Mike. There are a couple more comments or questions rather that I think we've already addressed in terms of bikes being on a shoulder versus on a shared use path. In fact, we'll do both, and how the project interacts with the Port of Wilmington or the Gulf Tainer project. Back to the greenery issue and landscaping. Would there be some buffer remaining between I-495 and the pathway? Opportunity for greenery, beautification, noise reduction, what have you?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the alternative selected. See if I get this right. The southern portion of Governor Printz Boulevard is very tight. There's drainage ditches. As you get closer to Edgemore Road, there's not much right of way in that location. Obviously, we wouldn't want to impact any existing vegetation to the extent possible. And again, if there's a maintenance entity that is part of this, then additional buffer plantings could be part of the final design. Jeff, I believe you're muted.
Received a request to go back to the alternative screen, so I went ahead and did that. Trying to keep track of all of our questions. So concern expressed about speeding, agreed, and we've definitely heard that from a lot of folks. Thank you. There would be significant areas with 2 northbound lanes for turns. So did you consider 2 lanes north on 1 south to accommodate those turns?
So that would be located at some of the critical intersections. And yes, we do have what I guess, Leah, you might want to chime in on this, but we talked about having a additional option that would be at the transition zones. So it would be a place where we would need to transition into the single lane in either direction. And that would include having 2 lanes on one side, 1 lane on the other, so that enough traffic could flow through the intersections.
Yeah, especially at the areas directly next to the 495 on and off ramps, we'd be looking very closely at that. So at this stage, we kind of did the preliminary traffic analysis we shared with you tonight, but in order to advance this to a more final concept, we definitely would be looking at kind of pinch points along the corridor where there's a significantly higher amount of vehicles right at the vicinity of Edgemore Road, where we may need to, for a brief stretch, have some additional capacity. But again, that would require some further analysis. But I'm sure many of you are familiar with traveling along a roadway when it is tapering down to 1 lane where it was 2, and there always is kind of a transition zone. So that's something we would be considering moving forward.
Thank you. We've gotten several questions about truck traffic on Governor Printz Boulevard, either with or without the circumstance of an incident on I-495. So I'll try to combine them into one. So will there be a restriction on trucks on Governor Printz Boulevard, or will it be available for daily traffic for trucks, or in the event of an incident on 495, and how would that be handled?
I know the trucks aren't fun, but generally speaking, it's legally difficult to have a truck restriction unless there's a structural reason for doing it. So if there's a bridge, for instance, that's deficient, it can't handle the weight of too many trucks, you can have a truck restriction. But beyond that, it's really hard to limit trucks' access to different roadways.
Regarding using Governor Printz Boulevard as an alternative during an incident on 495, fortunately or not, we had a great example of what happens when there's an issue on 495 a couple of years ago when the viaduct was closed due to structural issues. And DelDOT was able to collect a lot of data at that time that showed the overflow traffic does not use Governor Printz Boulevard, usually because there is enough messaging before and after, and now that we all use Waze and Google Maps to travel, cars are using 95 and other local routes to get around the area. So like I said, a couple of years ago, evidence did not show a lot of vehicles spilling over onto Governor Printz, which I think is good for local residents. And that's what we learned when looking into that issue after hearing the same concern at our first workshop.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions about the connection to Fox Point Park. And, very astutely asking, clearly there are a lot of issues with any option connecting to Fox Point. Is this still a goal for the project? And also, what type of parking might be provided for that type of access?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a goal of the project. I don't want to speak for you, Heather, but we heard from the community, and we know it's an important asset that, like I said, it's just underutilized because it's not accessible by pedestrians and bicyclists. It's just going to be a very expensive, challenging connection to make, and we've really tried to look at all different alternatives, what can be some simple solutions, and unfortunately there's not a simple solution. So it may be a project in itself, or as we talked about, it may be something that can be part of the planned improvements with the Gulf Container development at the port. But at this stage, we really want to just get something on paper that as things get redeveloped, if the asphalt plant was to be redeveloped, then the importance of a connection is identified and we can move forward from there.
Right, I'm just going to jump in and try and read the mind of whoever asked that question. I think they're asking not the question about the roadway link to Fox Point from the southern end. I think it might be a question about the connection between Claymont and Fox Point State Park, which has certainly long been an aspiration. I'm guessing that because of the parking part of the question. I know there's a strong interest in seeing that connection. We certainly heard at the last workshop interest in a riverfront trail link. We did not include that in our kind of top of tier recommendations. We will acknowledge that in the report because we really want to carry forward everything we've heard in the report. But we thought that the cost of that type of project, just as the cost of a bridge over the Northeast Corridor and I-495 would be astronomical. That riverfront trail would also be really an extremely high cost project and present some security issues as well because of the isolation of the area. So that's why we did not carry that forward into what you saw today.
Thank you. We already talked a little bit about the impact of the development of Gulf Container on the project, but a further question by the same person, thank you, is there any provision for an Edgemore area train station?
There is a report on WMAPCO's website. You'll find, I think we called it the Fox Point Transit Oriented Development Study that did look at what some of the transportation benefits of a new train station in the Edgemore area would be. There are transportation benefits, however, that's not part of our current long-range plans, but certainly could be something that gets looked at, in the future if parking at Claymont gets maxed out again, or there's a future need. But I don't think that's anything that's being currently considered.
Thank you, Heather. Another comment about using caution in understanding what travel patterns will be if there's an incident on 495. So again, thank you. That's definitely something that we will consider carefully. Heard that from a few people tonight. Next question is, are there examples of promenades next to interstates that you can show us? I can think of a couple, but if there are any other folks on the panel who would like to respond to that, if you can think of any initially, that would be great.
I
All
think
right.
you should take that one, Jeff.
I'll go ahead and jump in.
And I would add that it would be nice imagery to include in the report.
Yes, I've seen a few. One of them is actually near family in Brunswick, Maine, along US 1. There's a very heavily traveled pathway that goes right alongside Route 1, which is not an interstate, but it's a freeway in that area. So it's very much the same as I-495. And also a very long pathway that extends along, I'm not going to remember the number, but it's an interstate heading north out of Detroit that basically uses the right-of-way of the interstate as its primary route, passes under bridges and across ramps and what have you. In this case, of course, we wouldn't be crossing ramps. It would just be alongside the interstate. So those are two that come to mind immediately. So they do exist. And certainly if the bike and pedestrian traffic on the one in Maine is any indication, folks don't seem to have any issues with being adjacent to an interstate. It's very, very well used.
There's some lovely examples in Colorado too, but don't ask me to know the numbers offhand.
Cool, thank you. So yeah, that's a great idea. That'll leave put some suggestions in the report. All right, we have about 5 minutes left. I think we'll go we can go a couple minutes over and try to address all the questions that we've received so far. Hopefully we didn't miss any. If we did, as Leah mentioned, we will get back to you. There were suggestions at previous breakout sessions about landscaping, especially as like an aesthetic barrier, and lighting. Those are not specifically shown in the concepts. Would they be included in those concepts? And if so, what might they look like? Both lighting and landscaping.
Yeah, I think as the project develops, those are the items that we'd want to further enhance. And again, it really depends on who the maintenance partner is identified for the final project, whether it's the county or Friends of the Trail, to really what extent of landscaping and additional amenities could be added.
I think one thing that is clear when you look at the alternatives on the screen, certain ones have a little bit more open space and would allow for more or less landscaping. So, you know, alternatives 1A and B with maintaining all of the lanes of travel. We don't have nearly as much space to work with, but alternatives 2 and 3, there's a little bit more room to play with there. So it would we didn't want to show trees in just one because that would be misleading, but it's possible in all of them. But again, more space to work with in some than others.
Thank you. A couple more comments about port traffic. So we will definitely delve into that in some more detail as this moves forward to the report stage. We also have a comment that Kent Narrows in Maryland along US 301 has a trail, and along I-66 in Arlington, Virginia. So, and in the Florida Keys. So thank you all for those ideas as examples to go by. We talked about speed limit briefly, and that is not yet determined. And I guess the final question, I think it's the last one. Nope, there are two. The first is, will there be any kind of physical barrier, rocks, you know, Jersey barrier or anything like that between the road and the pathway to provide some separation, or will it just be that grass that's shown?
Yeah, we currently just show it as maintaining the required buffer, which is a 6-foot buffer between the roadway and the shared use path itself. That 6-foot buffer allows room for things like mailboxes and signage, roadway signage, so that it can be clear from the trail as well as from the roadway. There's certainly an opportunity to provide additional treatments, aesthetic treatments there, as well as buffer treatments in that 6-foot area, as long as it doesn't become a crash issue from a DelDOT standpoint or a traffic standpoint.
Thank you, Mike. And then one final question. And I know this is important to you, Mike, because you mentioned a little bit earlier. There's a significant issue with drainage and stormwater management, particularly in the area of the post office. And we saw that just, I don't know, whatever it was, a month or two ago. This is more a comment than a question. We mentioned it briefly, but it should be a high priority, and we understand. So certainly any significant capital project in this area would address drainage to the greatest extent that we can, with the understanding that we're very close to the river. So there may be some limitations on what can be done. Mike, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, just that we're very aware that there's a lot of flooding that occurs in this corridor, and you know, we can't address all of the issues, but we certainly, with this project, do not want to make anything worse, and make improvements where we can as part of the project.
Well, thank you. And thank you to all of our participants for sticking around. We are actually at the end of our questions, so that's just about perfect timing. I will go ahead and remind you to take the survey if you didn't write this down already at wilmapco.org/Governor Printz. Give us your feedback. Heather, do you recall when the survey is live until? I don't remember.
I don't think we said, but I think we can probably keep it open until about, I'll just make an educated guess. I'll say October 21st to give a month for people to view the PowerPoint, view the survey.
Okay.
But I really appreciate everybody attending. You can see the website there. If you've got other questions or thoughts that we didn't address tonight, or you think about them later, feel free to reach out to me at any time. You can see all my contact information there. And we really appreciate your participation tonight.
Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.